Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dreamleapers with Harriette Cole. And we are celebrating Pride Month this June, and I'm so excited to have with us a man I have known since really the beginning of his career. I was at Essence Magazine, and I met him, I think he was still in college. Let me tell you about him. He is Emil Wilbekin, the founder of Native Sun Now and founder and chief creative officer at World of Wilbekin Agency. He is a very well-known and respected journalist. He is a professor at FIT. He just finished his first year officially in that role. He's a media executive, culture critic, and human rights activist. He has played a role in promoting positive representation and opportunities for Black gay men through Native Sun Now. His notable career, which includes leadership roles at Vibe, Giant, Essence, and Afropunk, allowed him to receive numerous accolades, so many, including the 2016 Black Enterprise Modern Man, 2017 Master of Style Award by Out Magazine and Cadillac, 2018's GLAAD Rick Weiland Award, and being named among Fast Company's most creative people in 2019. His purpose in empowering marginalized communities and inclusivity has made a huge impact, earning him prestigious honors such as the 2019 Ad Colors Advocate Award and being honored at Cincinnati's 2020 Black Gay Pride. Please join me in welcoming Emil Wilbekin, a Renaissance man committed to driving positive change and advancing LGBTQ plus rights. Emil.
Hi, Harriet. It's so good to be with you today.
It is so good. And like I said, weren't you in college when I first met you?
I believe so. I was getting my master's in journalism at Columbia. So yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
That's when I was at Essence. So this is 30 plus years ago, something like that. It's a
That's
minute.
right.
It's a
It's a
minute.
long time.
Long time. And, over this period of time, we just think about time as it relates to the embrace of the LGBTQ plus community.
Mhm.
Things have changed so much. I mean, people back then, even in creative space, we were working in publishing, and
Mhm.
we think of publishing as a creative space. Many, many, many men and women
Yes.
were not out there. We didn't have the terms that we have now for
Mhm.
people being able to express exactly who they are. It's so different. What would you
Yes.
say you see
Mhm.
as differences in claiming identity over this time?
Mhm. So it's interesting when I moved to New York around the time that I met you, and I was in graduate school, in many ways, in the pocket of New York, things were very, very free and liberated. And I
Mhm.
think identity, culturally, racially, there was a lot of mix, but that was very privileged space, right? And so when you think about the rest of America and being from Cincinnati and going to college for undergrad at Hampton University, it's a different story. And so I think about that time and how conservative people were and how people weren't as open to LGBTQ plus identities, but also just other racial identities. And so
Mm.
I think
And
about that
let me
time.
ask you something, Emil. At
Mm,
Hampton, this is
yes.
one of our premier HBCUs.
Mhm.
HBCUs are typically known for being pretty homophobic.
Yes.
No diss. I'm a Howard grad, no diss,
Yeah.
but I just think
Yeah.
it's true.
Yeah.
Were you able to be out at Hampton?
No, not at all. And I tell people the story all the time. I mean, that is where a lot of my internalized homophobia really started because I was very challenged by the lack of acceptance there, the shame and stigma that happened, and oftentimes a very kind of witch hunt about identity. And so it was very, very challenging for me. So I think about that. At Hampton at that time. And then I think about where we are today, where at Hampton, they had Byron Perkins come out as the first out football player. And then at Howard, they have their first trans student body president. So we've come a
This is
really
huge.
long way.
This is
Huge. It's a
huge.
new day and age. Yeah.
Yes, it is. And so even in, as I mentioned, in publishing, which many people think of as a free space, a liberal space. You were part of the pioneering team that created Vibe magazine.
Yeah, that's
Which
correct.
was revolutionary when it came out. I was at Essence. Essence was and is supposed to be, it was kind of conservative
Yes.
for Black women. Vibe comes out,
Hmm.
it's Black, but it's multiracial. It is
Hmm.
willing to put topics in your face that
Hmm.
to be, let's say, to be critical of people
Hmm.
in writing, which is not what really happened at Essence or Ebony.
Yes,
Uh,
that's correct.
the choice was to do specifically uplifting stories, and Vibe was like, I'm gonna do all the stories.
That's right.
And Vibe is covering hip hop. Hip hop
Hmm.
was so incredibly homophobic.
That's right.
You were incredibly brave to
Hmm.
be out at
Hmm.
Vibe and help to change the dialogue around this burgeoning cultural
Hmm.
revolution that was hip hop, and how the LGBTQ plus community could be part of that. Can you talk about that?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, it was a very challenging time in hip hop, and it was the early days too. So again, there was this underlying like, oh, we're inclusive, but in the music, right, and the posturing, we're not, right? And oftentimes there's a lot of violence towards men, a lot of violence towards gay men, a lot of violence towards Black women, period, and then also the trans community. So it was very tricky. But I will say a lot that happened with Vibe was inspired by Quincy Jones and his
Yeah.
wanting us to create a very inclusive community. And so we took, we were going to do hard journalism, investigative reporting. And to your point, we were going to do pieces that weren't always glowing. Sometimes they were critical of the talent, right? And challenge people and take them to task. And I think a lot of that, as much as I want to take credit for being brave by myself, I was brave in community, right?
Mm.
So Jonathan Van Meter was the first very controversial editor who was an openly gay man, but there was also on the staff Scott Polson Bryant, who
That's
was
right.
openly gay. There was Hilton Alls, who was openly gay. And then also what I don't want us to lose track of in this conversation is there were Black feminist women like Joan Morgan, right? Who
Absolutely.
really were like, no, we're going to show everything and we're going to stand up for everybody. So I think that helps, right? When you're
So
in
the
community.
team was a very powerful, thoughtful, and courageous group of people.
Yes, yes. So it was in community that courage and that might came. Like I can't take credit for doing it alone by any means.
What were some of the stories that appeared in Vibe magazine that shone a light on this part of the community?
Sure. So I think where I will take credit is when I became editor in chief, I definitely started pushing the boundaries of the content that we were creating, right? So we did this one story that was about DL culture, which, is a down low culture. So this is at kind of the height of the AIDS pandemic, right? There's so much kind of homophobia going on, not just in hip hop, but in the Black community. This was also the time that you have the New York Times bestselling author Elin Harris
Right.
producing his work, which is getting a lot of attention and talks about DL culture. But you also have this HIV and AIDS rates were rising so much. And that, was partially being blamed on men who were living in the closet, and then also from drug use and so forth. But it was a bad time. It wasn't a great time for people to be waving rainbow flags. And so at
Mhm.
that time, we chose to tell these stories, and I was really chastised for a lot of the work because the community didn't want me putting our dirty laundry out there,
Right.
right? And then the kind of traditional Black folks didn't want to have the conversation. So it was challenging but very important work that needed to be done and conversations that needed to be had.
What were the responses like to
Hmm.
those types of stories? Because I think, and you described something that is so true. don't air your dirty laundry in public. Why in the world would you tell these kinds of stories in a magazine as big and loud
Mhm.
and seen, visible as Vibe? How did the
Mhm.
Black community respond?
So it was a mix, right? We had pockets. So, you know, this was also the time where, with Wendy Williams and a lot of the kind of Black gossip celebrity journalism was all about finding who was the gay rapper, right? It was this
Right.
search for the gay rapper. So there was intrigue, right? But then part of the community was celebrating the fact that we were being so vigilant and covering these stories. There were folks that were like, what are you all doing? This is, Sodom and Gomorrah. Why are you covering this? So it was really mixed, but I think it was just work that needed to be done.
Mhm.
And it was very provocative. It was very forward leaning. But now I feel like we stand on the right side of history when I look back at the work that was done, right? We did a Black lesbian story about aggressives, which are a very specific type of lesbians who model themselves after men. We were just very inclusive. Billy Porter, we shot in the magazine back then, Kevin Aviance, like all these now iconic gay figures, they were in the magazine back then.
And when is back then? Give us a sense of time.
So this is the early 90s, right? Late 80s, early 90s, and what is termed as the golden era of hip hop.
Right.
So this was a turning point, right? But it was also like, again, there was a lot of homophobia going on. There's a lot of racism. There was a lot of police brutality. We had the Rodney King verdict. It was OJ. There was a lot happening at
So
that time. So I
so
do
much.
want to put it in context of this was a very changing world where, again, post crack, post AIDS pandemic, what does the world look like? But it was also a renaissance of Black culture at that time.
An absolute renaissance. I mean, I think, one of the things that happened with music was
Mhm.
the music video. And
Yes.
the music video that was the shot that rang around the world.
Hmm.
We know that Japan and China and Europe became
Hmm.
opportunities for our music, our culture to travel around the globe.
That's right.
And how did that storytelling impact what you did at Vibe?
Well, I think that the globalization of hip hop was on our side, right? Because
Mhm.
in many ways, um, it wasn't, right? Because then it opens you up to the Caribbean, which is a huge
Yes.
base of hip hop, and also, within dancehall reggae, and there was a
Mhm.
lot of homophobic incidents that were happening in Jamaica. But in terms of Europe and Japan, and even early days on the continent of Africa, it opened us up to be more expansive in the conversations we were
Mhm. That's good. Hey guys, this is
having.
Dreamleapers with Harriette Cole. We are talking with Emil Wilbekin. He's done so many things over the years. He helped to found Vibe magazine and then went back to run it some years later. He and I both worked at Essence. You were there a couple times, right?
Yeah. No,
Think it
no, once, one
was it
long
one?
time.
See, I can't remember. It
Yeah.
was so I think of that internship moment. That
Yes,
which was
yes.
many, many years before. Anyhow, he created something called Native Son that we're going to talk about in a moment. But before that, I want to go backwards, Emil, to I always like to look at family and how family influences who you are today. And
Yeah.
I didn't have the chance to meet your mother, but I met her through photos. She was the
Mhm.
fiercest, most fabulous woman. She was always fly, always, always, always with her own style. I want to know, growing up in Cincinnati
Mhm.
in the 70s, you
Yeah.
know, how did you come out to your mother? How did that happen? A
Mhm.
strong, beautiful Black woman. I am
Mhm.
certain that that wasn't the easiest conversation to have.
Right.
What is that story?
Well, the story is very, mixed and hard. My parents, I was very raised in a good West Indian household. My father's from St. Croix. My parents were Christian. We were in church every single week. And, my mother was working. So they were very, very, and my mother's from Des Moines, Iowa. So very kind of great work ethic and so forth. So they were very, very engaged in culture and particularly Black culture and the arts. So I was raised in this very open but very structured kind of family. And so I think about my dad always said, you have to be open to everything so that you can make a judgment or opinion about it. So it was a little.
That's interesting.
Oh
That's
yeah,
very
no, they were very like, you should see everything, you should try everything so that you have a very grounded, fair opinion about it. And so that's how I was raised. So I kind of hoped that when I came to them with my truth, that they would be more open and accepting, and they absolutely were not.
Uh-oh. And
At
how
all.
old were you when that happened?
So I was older. I came out at 22. I was
Okay.
already in New York. It was after Hampton. It was after living in Europe for the summer and then going to Columbia. And my parents, my mother kept, when are you getting married? When are you getting married? When are you getting married? And so I was like, okay, we got to have this conversation. So we had the conversation, and I was shocked at how respectability politics and their faith took over in a way that they were not accepting at all. And immediately my mother started reading scriptures, and they threatened to cut me off and send everything that was mine. They threatened to disown me. It was really, really traumatic for me. Very, very traumatic.
And this was
So,
the two of them together, like in the moment when you're telling me?
both of them. Weirdly, my father was more accepting and understanding than my mother, and that I think typically is it actually how it goes.
Really?
My mother was furious because I think she felt like she let me down in some way, like she had done. So she hadn't been a good mother. She didn't do the right things, but it wasn't about that at all. And so the saving grace in the story is my older brother, who at the time was living in Washington, D.C., and was in law school. And he had been, one of his professors was gay and would take his class of law students to AIDS hospices to handle the wills and testaments for these people who were dying of HIV and AIDS. And so he was much more understanding and empathetic in that way. And he is the one that challenged me and my family, my parents, to find a common ground, to find a place of understanding. And so I'm sorry.
It's okay.
So that was really an important moment of keeping the family together. So
And
we all vowed to stay connected.
how long did it take for true healing to occur?
Years and years and years. So at first, it's like the 5 stages of grief, honestly. And it was really challenging. And then I wouldn't go home for the holidays. And then finally I would go home, but then it was kind of like it was like a Cold War, like don't ask, don't tell. And then as I got more comfortable in my skin and around my new identity, then I was able to push back a little more and challenge a little more. I was in therapy, my parents were in therapy separately, and we really, it took years. Luckily before my father passed away, we sat and had a really long talk, and he said, I'm learning to work through this. But ultimately you're my son and I love you. So I want to support you. And he was much more supportive. My mother came later. And she, my mother had a doctorate in psychology. She, aside from being a lawyer, she used to be a social worker. So I think she finally utilized her tools to work on herself and kind of practice what she was preaching, which I was hoping she would do. And eventually, I'll never forget this. I was co-chairing the Stonewall Community Foundation
Mhm.
gala when I sat on the board. And she came to the event, and we were honoring Lee Daniels, we were honoring Isaac Mizrahi, Janet Mock, all the Jason Collins. Like, it was really amazing. And in the middle of the program, Bevy was hosting with me, Bevy Smith. And my mother calls me over. She's sitting on the side. And I was like, I'm in the middle of hosting. Like, how can I
Yep.
help you, Mom? And she said, give me your hand.
Oh.
And I gave her my hand, and she took it and she slid a check in my hand. And the check was for the organization. And she said, you all are doing such great work. I'm so proud of you. And I see things differently now. And that was a big turning point for us.
Whew. Brings tears to my eyes. And thank you so much for sharing that story. I mean, it's very personal and very real.
Mhm.
And I think helps people who may not understand,
Yeah.
how do you actually go through it? It's one thing, you have become an activist, you've created this organization, we're going to talk about it in a minute, but how you get to that is how
Yeah,
you get to you, how you get to own your truth.
that's right.
And when the people who love you the most and whom you love the most are having a struggle, it can be
Yeah.
so much easier to just live a double life, never let them know, never
Mhm.
share that.
Yeah, I think we could have gone, and we talked about that, right? I talked about with them. They were like, "Why can't you just not live that life?" And I just was like, "I can't do that." But
Right.
but we did explore kind of like, okay, what does that look like? And the other side is, or you just sever from your family, right?
Mm,
And that happens a lot too, and that's
it
heartbreaking.
does.
Like, who wants to sever from their family? So I applaud my family for being open and doing the work. But it took a really long time, Harriet. I'm not gonna exaggerate. Like, it took a really long time.
I believe that. And look, we've seen some of the most conservative politicians as an example, who
Mhm,
one of their children turns out to be of the community, and then
mhm.
suddenly they got to figure it out. And well, this
Right,
goes against whatever I say my values are, but then here's somebody who you love more than life, and you
right.
have to figure it out.
That's right.
And I think that
Mhm.
transformation often happens when you're forced to
Yes,
look at people that you love for who they are,
that's
rather
right.
than whatever the construct of society says you're
Right.
supposed to be, right?
And I think for me, particularly with my parents, because they were so dynamic, because they were strivers, because they were so much about culture and community and their faith, um, it was kind of a natural evolution for them. I just think they were from an older generation, and they had been through Jim Crow and all these different things. And so they didn't want to see me in harm's way, right? They had
Sure.
worked so hard to have a better life and to raise my brother and I. But I think what was transformative for my mother was to see me evolve and become, powerful in media, winning awards, and being my true self. And then that was something she could identify as a Black feminist, as a woman who went to law school in the early 60s, pregnant with my brother, right? So she could see that I was fighting for something bigger than myself.
Did you ever bring partners home?
I did. I did once. I did. And, it was before my mother passed away. As the first, I only did it once or had the chance to do it once. And what was so beautiful was my mother was in love with him more than I was. I was like, what's happening here? And thanks to him, I have this beautiful video of my mother playing the piano and us singing a duet together,
Oh, that's
which,
so sweet.
I'll cherish forever.
Yeah, it's wonderful when you can have that that circle, that
Yeah.
and the fact that your parents went to therapy. I hope anybody who's listening, who's going through whatever they're going through,
Yeah.
you're never too old for therapy. Therapy can actually help. And I loved hearing that. That was kind of a surprise. I get that you would go into therapy, but your
Mhm.
parents loved you so much
Mhm.
that they're like, we need help with this. We can't figure it
Yeah.
out on our own. That your father went into therapy. A lot of men are like, heck no, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
That's for women. I mean, there are a lot of things that you described that really show how much love there was
Yes.
between you and your parents, that and your family, your brother, that the effort was for unity, for unification,
That's
for
right. That's
unification,
right.
not for dissolution.
That's right.
Yeah, which I
Mhm.
think is so beautiful. And so for people who may find themselves in this situation now,
Mhm.
grappling with their how to tell their parents, how to talk to their parents, what
Right.
do you recommend?
So I recommend honesty is the best policy. As scary as it might be, as hard as it might be, I think it's very important because a lot of times people are afraid to tell their family or their loved ones. And what ends up happening, and I hear this a lot, is they end up cheating their family from a moment for them to evolve, a moment to show love, a moment of empathy, and a moment of real faith, really. And so I think, I have so many friends that are like, they can't believe I went through so much turmoil because for them, they told their parents were fine. And they were terrified. So it's not always a dramatic situation, but
Mhm.
I think I tell this specifically to people that want to come out to their mothers. Your mother's not going to not love you.
You're right.
She's just not. So
Not in our
it might
DNA.
it might not be comfortable, it might be challenging, but at the end of the day, a mother is not going to not love her child. And so I think having that bravery and courage and trust and faith and just being honest, sometimes you give people the opportunity to show their own humanity.
Mm. And patience, I think that's
Patience.
important. Did you have friends on the other side of your life who were supporting you as you were going through this with
Oh,
your parents?
absolutely. I mean, my family was the
Right.
way through because I felt so disillusioned. The other part that was interesting where a lot of my friends were friends with my parents. So they were like, you know how they are, give them time. But a lot of my friends really like embraced me and I had such a strong network and they were just super duper supportive. But I will say all of them were encouraging me to give my parents time and space and were actually like a lot of them were on my parents' side, like, don't just cut them off. Like you have to
Okay.
do the work. Like you really have to educate them and give them space. And you have to be empathetic and compassionate the way you want them to be.
And Emil, when did you know that this was your truth?
I, in hindsight, I knew as a teenager,
Mhm.
but again, like I said, I grew up in the AIDS crisis. I was terrified about that. There wasn't any real role models. I had one teacher at school that I kind of thought was, but you didn't, in Cincinnati, you wouldn't dare have that conversation. And so it was just something that was always kind of inside. And I was, and I thought, oh, it's a phase, it's puberty, it'll pass. I'm a teenager and never pass. So it's like, okay.
You're like, "This is
So
who I am."
yeah. So definitely by the time I got to Hampton, I was pretty sure about it, but I still couldn't reconcile it for myself. And it wasn't until, I mean, I was 22. I was in New York for a couple of years by the time I finally was like, I can't live like this because it was tearing me apart inside.
Mm. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. This is Dream Leapers with Harriette Cole. We are in conversation with Emil Wilbekin. This is Pride Month, and we're celebrating the LGBTQ plus community and, learning stories, getting insights, what it means to just love, man, just whoever you are, however you are. It's a powerful thing when we can open our arms and embrace people for who they are. And I think everybody wants that. And it can be really difficult to find your family, to find your community. So, Emil, you in building this incredible career that you have, you had the idea to create Native Son.
Hmm.
Can you tell us what Native Son is and why it was important to start it when you did?
Sure. So I will say that I believe the idea for Native Son was really born in that conversation with my parents, because what I went through was so hard and so challenging. I didn't want anyone else to have to go through what I went through. And so I think that's when it was actually born. But it was something that after I left Essence, um, I, went on a sojourn to India with a friend and went on kind of an eat, pray, love journey, and came back and was like, I have to do this work. I have to start this platform, organization, community. I didn't know what it would be or look like. That because I had been given so much privilege, right? Because when I was editor in chief at Vibe and we won the National Magazine Award, um, the New York Times interviewed me and they asked me if I was gay. And I remember being like, ooh, I have to answer this question right now
Wow.
at the New
Was that
York
the first
Times.
time you were asked by a
In
publication?
public, yeah. And I was like, it's the New York Times. And I started laughing and they were like, why are you laughing? And I was like, because I'm so out in my life, but I've never said it to the number one news outlet in the world. And that was a real turning point for me. And so it was in that
And when was
moment.
that?
That was 1992.
Okay.
Yeah. And but all of the work I think that I'd done, I had so much privilege. And even though I had to push back a lot at Vibe being out in that position, I wanted to create a safer space for my community, for people that looked and lived like me, that they could not be in the shadows of a nightclub or a chat room, but we could be in the light and be reflections of each other and build a community of like-minded folks who want to do the best, who want to be visionaries, dreamers, and doers, who are excellent at what they do, who are different.
Mhm.
And so I came back from India and all of my friends were like, you've been talking about this, which I hadn't even realized I'd been talking about it. And I just started putting, write the vision, make it plain. I started writing in my journal and I started meeting with folks. I did a listening tour with different intergenerational Black, gay, and queer men to find out their stories. What were the similarities? What were the differences? Were they living with HIV or not? Were they out at work? Were they the only one? All the things. What was the relationship with their families? And there were a lot of similarities and a lot of differences. And so I basically was using everything that I had learned working in media to create a movement, community, and platform, which would be called Native Son, named after James Baldwin's Notes of a Native Son, because I thought he would be the perfect icon for us, because he was someone that spoke truth to power, who lived at the intersection of his Blackness and his queerness, and was also a civil rights activist, an artist, was challenged by issues with the Black church, but someone who wasn't afraid to speak up for himself.
So
A
you
lot of
started in 2016,
yes,
and at that point, I mean, just thinking about what had been happening
yeah,
in our communities, we are seeing by then there are a lot more gay, queer, Black men who are out,
mhm,
yet there's still tremendous homophobia. The trans community is being attacked like
yes,
crazy. I
mhm,
feel like there there was a backlash in a sense
mhm,
in terms of not in New York so much, but in other
mm,
parts of the country. Well, maybe it's in New York as
yeah,
well. But what
yeah.
was going on?
Well, I would say let's go to where it started and then like how we started and where
Yeah.
we are now,
Mhm.
right? So when I started, it was the same year that Moonlight came out, right? So
Mhm.
Terrell Alvin McCraney's beautiful play, which was adapted into this film and wins the Academy Award, right? It was
Which
about
was
a
huge.
young Black queer love story, basically. And so that was a sign for me, right? And then marriage equality happens, right? So all these things were happening at this kind of inflection point. And so we were getting all these rights and privileges, and you saw the idea of pride growing. You saw more gay couples marrying, starting to have kids. And then in 20, oh, and then, but simultaneously, Trump wins for the first election. And so that's when I realized in that moment that this was going to be more than just a social kind of idea, that this would be something that would have to ground the community, support the community, advocate for the community. And so we did the awards in 2016 in November. We honored Don Lemon, George C. Wolfe, and DeRay McKesson.
Mhm.
And then Trump wins like a few weeks later. And the first real event that we hosted was a conversation about how we were going to survive in the age of Trump. And that's when I really understood the purpose of Native Son, being in community, having conversation. Richard Brookshire, Darnell Moore, we were having these really, Robert Settle, like just powerful conversations. And so that was kind of when the community building took heart. And I
Mhm.
think the part that's been really interesting now that we are living in this very precarious election year, and there is, to your point, so much anti-Blackness,
Mhm.
anti-women rhetoric, anti-LGBTQ, banning of books, right? All these things,
So
erasing
much.
our Black history and culture, that and the issues around immigration and the Middle East, all the things. So it's more important now to have built community. So I'm very grateful that we started in 2016
Yes.
and now we are getting to critical mass. Like it's 80, almost 80,000 on Instagram folks, and the pass along is in the millions. And so it's important, right, that we have representation, but that we as a community can support not just Black, gay, and queer men, but Black men, Black women, Black trans folks, Asian, Latin, everybody, right? We've got to support each other at this point.
So, Emil, for people who may really not understand language and identity,
Yes.
gay, Black, queer, what's the
Mhm.
difference between gay and queer?
Mhm.
What do these labels mean?
So gay and queer is semantic, really.
Okay.
Older generations prefer gay. For us, we think of queer, it means something's wrong with you. The younger generations, the Gen Zs and the Alphas, have taken it back to be a point where they don't have to be boxed in, that they can kind of be whatever they want, right? They can be gender nonconforming, they could be trans, they could be, non-binary, bisexual, whatever they want to be, right? So it's kind of all inclusive. I think that from an identity perspective, we're living in an age where we're seeing more and more people self-identify earlier,
Yes.
choosing not to be binary, so not to just be a man or a woman. And so it's a very interesting time. And we saw a lot of this happen during 2020 during the racial protests, for the identity protest, right? And so we're living in this world now where, what you see is not always what you get. And so people have to be more conscious of how people want to be identified, what their preferred pronouns are, and things like that. So it's tricky, but it's not, because at the end of the day, if you just respect people for what they're telling you that they are, that's what it is.
Hmm. I would agree with you. So we're coming up on the Native Son Awards for
Yeah.
this year.
Mhm.
Who is being honored and why?
Well, I'm really excited about the Native Son Awards this year because the mix is really strong and powerful. So we're honoring Bill T. Jones, who is an iconic choreographer and dancer. He began his career with Bill T. Jones and his partner Arnie Zane. They were really known as kind of these downtown darlings that were really about avant-garde dance. And so he is, in the same class and community, right, of Alvin Ailey and Arthur Mitchell and George Faison. So he's an elder, and so he's an icon in that world. So super excited about him. We're honoring Law Roach, the celebrity stylist and style architect of the day, mostly known for his work with Zendaya and Celine Dion. We're honoring Jeremy Pope, this young actor who has done incredible work in the movie In the Inspection, on Pose, in Hollywood, on FX, and has been nominated several times for Tony Awards for his role in Choir Boy. And then we're also honoring Keith Boykin, who is a stalwart advocate and advocate of the Black queer community. He was in the Obama administration. He was in the Clinton administration. And he's a New York Times bestselling author, and he's a contributor to CNN. And then there's Chris Chambers, who is our contemporary, who is one of the fiercest, most incredible music publicists of our time, and currently represents Usher and Erykah Badu and Jill Scott and all these amazing artists. And then finally, Gabriel Maldonado, who's probably the youngest of the honorees. Well, no, Jeremy's probably the youngest, but Gabriel is an HIV and AIDS activist and was part of the Obama administration and their task force on AIDS, but most importantly, built the Legacy campus in Riverside, California, which is a campus built to support Black and brown folks living with HIV and AIDS. And it's an acre campus with dormitories named after James Baldwin and George M. Johnson and Twiggy Garcon. And they have health facilities, and it's state of the art. And I just think that Gabriel would do this work in this day and age is incredible.
What is your reason for hosting these awards? What do you hope will happen? I mean, obviously you're honoring people who deserve it, but what's the bigger purpose?
So I think it's twofold. So the main purpose is to what we say is amplify the voice and visibility of Black, gay, and queer men so that people know who these men are, right? Because in the past, so many of us lived in the shadows, right? And weren't out, didn't have the privilege to be out, but no one knew who they were, right? And I often use the two examples as George Faison winning the Tony for The Wiz in 1976 for Best Choreography, and Bayard Rustin, right, who is the architect of the March on Washington, who was one of the lieutenants of Dr. Martin Luther King. Those two men have done so much work to transform this country, right? In art and culture and politics and advocacy. And people need to know who they are. So I don't want anyone to do this great work and people not know that they're native sons. The other thing I would say is it's fundraising, right? So this is our biggest tentpole event of the year where we can fundraise to help tell these stories. We are the preeminent platform that tells the stories and authenticity of Black, gay, and queer men in a way, in our own voices, by us, for us, by us. And it's just really important that we have the space for now, but also for the future. And so I'm really trying to building this as future proofing so that young Emil doesn't have to go through this, right? What I went through, doesn't have to go through the pain, doesn't have to over explain to his parents, because he could actually say, look at this Instagram page, look at this website. I'll give you a great example. I was in Atlanta for a play in October, and a friend said, I wanted you to meet these young boys, young men, they go to Morehouse, and they were freshmen. And they were like, we know Native Son. We love Native Son. Mm-hmm. And one of them talked about using Native Son to help his mother understand his identity.
Beautiful.
So that's what Native Son is about. And that's why the awards are important.
And moving forward, what are the goals for Native Son as you look to the future?
So we are in the process of having a media partnership with a existing platform so that we can tell these stories broadly and bigger and better and stronger, and then advocating for ourselves, right? One of the things we're doing, taking my pages from Susan Taylor and Essence, we are going to be talking about issues that impact the community during the Native Son Awards. So yes, we're there to have a good time and look fabulous and give folks their flowers, but these are the issues that people need to pay attention to in this upcoming election. So making sure we have a presence and are bringing folks together to talk about the issues that most impact us at our intersection of our Blackness and queerness.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, I mean, this election is so important. Everyone is. And, we have to be nonpartisan here.
Yes,
However, I think that there's a lot of apathy. I think a lot of people haven't been paying attention and aren't clear about how high the stakes are.
Right.
When you face people who say, I'm not going to vote, I'm not getting involved, it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
What do you say? What does Native Son say to get people to open their eyes and make a different decision?
Right. So we're a 501c3, so we have to be nonpartisan as well. So our positioning is you have a voice and you should use your voice, and you have to advocate for yourself as well as for your community. That's your family, that is your friends, that's your partner, because your rights are based on you having a voice. And so what does that look like if you don't use your voice? Would you let someone else choose your future for you? Right.
Mm-hmm.
So the biggest opportunity for voters are young people. And there's a whole bunch of them that are now going to be eligible to vote for the first time.
Right.
I think that's a really great opportunity, right, for them to use their voice. And we're seeing that, right, with the student protests all over the world.
Yes.
And so if those young people use their voices, I think it's just important for them to represent themselves, but what they care about, whatever that is.
Excellent. So for those who would like to attend the Native Son Awards in whatever way they can, where do they go? Where do they go to?
The best way to attend at this point, because praise the Lord, we are almost sold out of tickets for the space, which is a blessing. We will be streaming on the Native Son Now Facebook and YouTube channels. And so you can tune in there. We're going to have live carpet streaming and excerpts from the awards. So we're super excited about that.
And what day and time?
It is Wednesday, June 12th. And the red carpet will start at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And the show will begin at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
And where can people go to learn more about Native Son?
You can go to nativeson.us. And the easiest place is our Instagram channel, which is at Native Son Now.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Emil. As always, it's just, I learn so much every time I talk to you.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you for doing this great work. It makes a difference. It's a labor of love, I know. Yes. And you do it at such a high level. So thank you, my friend. Good luck with the awards. And I'm glad that everyone who has tuned in was here. And I hope that you learned a lot in this wonderful conversation. Thank you, Emil.
Thank you, Harriette, for having me.
And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Until next time, have a great day and make it count.